first of all, I think it's really interesting to be here because it's a very open format. And what I'll try to do is paint the picture sort of holistically and then dive into some of the different topics. So holistically, I think that we need to find a new purpose and a joint narrative that we can believe in, not only in Sweden and not only everybody in Sweden, but on a global basis. Kind of like Christianity did before, or football, if you like football, or some of the isms have done. And in order to do that, you need to develop as an individual. And I think you can do that until the second you die. And I think that society should not only teach you things in school for some years and then try to get you a job, but rather help you develop yourself to your full potential. So if you have purpose in society and you have a lot of people reaching their full potential, and you have a school and society that champions entrepreneurship and change making so that we can create a bigger and bigger pie for everybody to share, I think you have the building blocks for tomorrow's successful society. But in order to change that, there's a lot of things that needs to change because we've inherited all these wars between men and women, between employers and employees, between left and right, between east and west, between a lot of things. And that is built into our society narrative in a way that is very difficult to wash away. So if you have that as a backdrop when we go in and discuss some of the other things, then maybe you will understand my points better.
Hi and welcome to another episode of Future Skills. This is Ludvig Sunstrom, and together with Mikael Syding, I host Future Skills, where we prepare you for a future of accelerating change. In this episode, we talk to serial entrepreneur Ola Ahlvarsson, and I think Ola is a really interesting guy because he's founded more than 20 businesses and worked with many of the world's biggest brands, many that you know of like McDonald's, Google, Microsoft, Merck, Procter & Gamble, Twitter, IBM. It's like Harvard, it's like crazy. The list just goes on. He's also an avid martial artist with a black belt in karate, and he's become the European champion in Goju Ryu Karate, the Swedish champion in Kung Fu and Taekwondo, and the world champion in WAKO kickboxing. Two of Ola's biggest businesses are Star Stable, the world's largest online horse game with more than 6 million users, and Epicenter, which is Sweden's largest scale-up incubator. And they're also expanding to other countries. Now, in this discussion with Ola, what you'll learn is, first of all, how to look at the world through multiple dimensions or lenses to see things from a different perspective, like the past and current paradigms of the business world. And then the discussion takes a completely different turn where we learn about how Ola almost got swindled by his Miami employee and how a team of Indians actually did make off with his money. And then we hear Ola's view on morality. Is this one thing or is it situational? And then after that, he deconstructs Darwinism, communism, libertarianism, and individualism. One interesting question that's raised there is, do you really have freedom of speech? Then we talk about other stuff, business things, like the difference between a scale-up and a startup, and why it's easier to become a rap star than it is to create a successful scale-up company in Sweden. And then why Ola does not believe in a theory of cyclical societal change, but why he does believe in accelerating change of technology and how he's personally preparing for the future. And finally, Ola tells us what he would do if he were the benevolent dictator of the world. So with that said, we can jump into the interview. Thanks for being so much. Thanks for being so much, Ola. Thanks for being here, Ola. And one thing that I learned from you, I don't know what to call it because I read this in Swedish, but it's like this model with 6 different factors for how innovation can happen. And I'm wondering if you could explain this model in English.
From Mission Possible, from way back when. I mean, it's just different perspectives. So if you find a truly new technology, if you find blockchain, you can drive innovation based on that technology. But you can also find a completely different narrative. Apple had a completely different narrative than everybody else trying to sell phones with features, right? You felt different. It was something completely different. So you can also have a narrative to build from that narrative. And then you have when I wrote the book, I focused also a lot of different customer behaviors. If you have a different kind of customer behavior, customer need, if you have a lot of people start caring about the planet much more, start questioning whether you should kill animals or not, all of a sudden there's a gigantic market for fake meat, right?
Okay.
Which is kind of funny because a lot of the fake meat is super chemical and super a lot of other things that people usually are afraid of,
right,
without knowing whether it's good or bad for them. But
right,
it is at least not killing animals, right? So you can start with different customer needs and you can extrapolate that. What happens if every country gets as equal as Sweden does? What happens then with consumption and then you take a not so equal country?
Yeah, this is kind of what I think is why I thought it was interesting to begin with, because what's the book's name? Only the Paranoid Survive or something, with Andy Grove.
Yeah.
And he didn't invent it, but the whole paradigm shift idea that if something really, really significant all of a sudden happens, and then your industry will change. And I think this model that you have come up with here, or at least that I learned from you, this model it ties into this in a way that makes you understand this much better.
On a high level, it is taking on a lens and looking at what does the world look like through this lens. So, for instance, if I'm just looking at which networks are evolving around certain things, what can I learn from that, and how can I build business based on that understanding? But it could also be a political lens. Or, for instance, if I look at the world with the lens of a militant feminist, how do I look upon a James Bond movie? How do I look upon recruitments? How do I look upon the fact that very few women have boats and very many men have boats? I think it's 99-1. Is that fair? Guys pays for all the boats. Is that fair or not fair? So then I take on a lens. And for a lot of people, then that is the truth. They have that one-dimensional view on the world. So when my dad grew up in the 30s and 40s, it was, race war. It was Untermenschen and it was fascism and whatever. And then it became ism wars between East and West and communism and the free world, as we like to call it, right? So that was one battle that happened. And we've had a battle for a long time between sort of men and women. That's a battle that is raging in all the media, and yeah. But you wouldn't do the same. You wouldn't write the same things about short and tall people because there's no war going on there, right?
Yeah.
When you hire people or maybe assess entrepreneurs, do you think that they can train their ability to change lenses, or is this something that's innate, something they come with to start with?
If you look at the sort of 1800th century German philosophers, they all believe that we were people that developed, right? And there are different takes on how we actually grow and develop throughout life if we challenge ourselves. And I have a friend of mine, Thomas Björkman. He wrote a book called The Nordic Secret. And The Nordic Secret is really explaining how we just went completely crazy with economical growth, prosperity, and all these things happening. And he argues that the politicians very early on built in a view on self-development and conscious development, where we have what is now the folkhögskolor that existed in various types of camps or gatherings and whatever, where people back in those days, they spent like 6 months in different camps going to trainings. They could be religious or the Social Democrats or others, but we trained and we developed based on a view that if we have people developing themselves, society will develop. Whereas in other countries, it stayed extremely hierarchical, like Germany and France, much more hierarchical than we were. With a vous instead of calling people you or these reforms that sort of killed hierarchies here. It came from Sweden, and it came from a very, very equalitarian society. So I think that everybody can train to develop. We have missed out on an opportunity to train people in school, feeling that everybody can think and believe and have whichever values they want. All values are as good. I don't think so. I used to think that. I don't think so at all. And coming back to your recruitment question, I think that everybody can develop. In our groups, everybody have to develop. I think that you either develop or you decline. There's no sort of status quo where you just stay the same. That is declining. And I think that there are values that are completely unfit to work in our organizations. So if you are, for instance, if you are a North Korean believer in the system, you would never get a job. It would be illegal not to hire you because of your political views. I would take that risk anytime. If you were part of a militant motorcycle gang and think that those values are, I wouldn't agree to that as well. And there's a bunch of religious takes that if they are at the core of your values, you wouldn't work well in our group as well. And I think that societies need to take a stance. I think companies need to take a stance. And I think consumers need to take a stance that we're not doing. How the hell can we sell bombs to people that also have stoning of people being unfaithful as part of the legal system? Is that okay or not okay? I don't think it is. Would you like to have somebody that's just stoned somebody for dinner at your place? I don't think that's okay either. And there's a bunch of different things where I think that there's some kind of morale that we have as a country, which is completely different than what we have as companies and completely different than we have as individuals. And I think that's very, very damaging to the world. I think that we should be much more sort of in sync. Morale is one thing. It's not different things depending on context.
How would you go about making those things come in sync?
I would take the most, because I also believe that the most prosperous countries are the ones that have figured this out. So if you would gather the most prosperous countries and be closer knit around which rules of engagement we would want to have, we would lift countries and leaders towards the things that opens up the global opportunities for these countries. And I think we will topple a lot of governments that aren't abiding by laws of humanity or about other things. But we need to pair this with opportunity. We can't just tell people how to live their lives if we don't give opportunities. And I think that that's where we've been pretty bad. We have been having an industrial model where we've exploited people and the planet to become rich and buy really big watches, right? Whereas now there's a whole new breed of companies that want to improve the world, maybe make even more money while doing so. But if you're not doing good things, then I think you won't have good investors in the future, good customers, good employees, and good other things.
I think what you were saying before about how, for example, Sweden or other Scandinavian Nordic countries, they started with this thing where we're more equal. We don't use these special pronouns,
yeah,
like the Germans did, for example,
yeah.
The hierarchical thing. But so that was a major paradigm shift when that first happened. Mm-hmm. But then it was good, but then maybe we took it too far. And everything can be taken too far, right? And I think a good parallel is like in business. So first we have Taylorism and really hardcore work division specialization. And that, like, everything is just geared towards production, everything. Mm-hmm. And that works like crazy. And then eventually you take it too far. Mm-hmm. And it's like a pendulum that goes too far, or yin or yang or something. Too much of one thing. And then suddenly it becomes more effective to focus on just eliminating waste and focusing on quality. So then, like, the whole total quality movement comes in, like, and that becomes the major thing in management and business. And then today we have different stuff. But I think that's like a good parallel.
Yeah, but I very often there are pendulum swings, and I think that it's pretty complex because there's a time in history where certain things work, right? If there's a war, you can't sit down. So guys, what do you think? What should we do here? You need to have somebody that shouts at people to go and take the hill, risking their own lives, right? And you shoot them if they don't try. That's a completely different scenario than if you are in a peaceful Stockholm 2018, right? And depending on the maturity and the schooling and the values of the people that you're trying to lead, different leadership styles work completely differently.
I think this is one thing that many countries do wrong and many teachers do wrong. They never explain that morale actually changes with the situation.
Absolutely. And it's opaque. So I was coming as a Swedish manager to India running Indian companies and running an Indian company. And I was like, I thought they all like loved the modern way that I was doing things. And I left and they were performing best in the group until no money came in. Oh, that's slow with the banks here, they said. And then it turns out they'd taken the money, they just sent fake reports and they were building something completely different with our money, right? And I didn't see it coming at all. Or I come to Miami and my gardener in Miami says, no, sir, I cut this yesterday. And the grass is super high and I have a camera. So he's not been there for 6 months. He's just been sending invoices, right? That wouldn't happen in Sweden. So there is there, I have a camera. I would never have a camera in Sweden. I wouldn't even have thought about it, right? But so morale changes, but it also changes in a world where there is no employment security, where there is a bunch of other things. Then workers also behave completely differently than in a society where people are taken care of. So it's a system that is much more complex. And if you look at that, and then you have your own personal development and your own views. And I mean, if you're a normal Swede, 1 in 1,000 agrees to what you think in the world. Just to give perspective. And we think that we're smarter, and that when the others become A, more educated, B, stop believing in the wrong things, C, come here and can sort of see the truth, then we think they learn to become like us, right? And that is culture. Their culture feels exactly the same thing. If we just got the things right and understood, we would think like them. And that is why it's so difficult with integration, or so difficult with cross-border business sometimes, when culture just does not work out with each other.
How many cultures, or like if you look at it from a higher perspective, compared to just being completely immersed in one culture, how many cultures do you think a person can live to the point where they understand all of these and can merge them and understand how they intersect?
But I think it's, if you look at your own views, it's very difficult to take a step back from them and say, oh, you believe in the freedom of the individual. Why is that? That's a construct, right? The freedom of the community. And isn't the community more important? Well, that became Soviet Union. Or aren't we sort of animals? And the strongest animals have always sort of, you have to let the strongest offspring build the next offspring. That's the whole purpose of evolution. Then you become a Nazi and you can kill the ones that are not strong, right? Or that we're sort of super individualistic and that's freedom. But the American Constitution, in Homo Deus, they dissect that, or in Sapien, they say, whatever it says, it's everybody's born free under God with the right to pursue happiness, or something similar. Free, what is that? That's a construct, right? Under God, maybe not, right? Yeah. To pursue happiness, what is happiness? And that's very individualized. And all of these are just chemical things happening in our body, right? So basically that whole set of thinking is made up and anchored in a culture that you believe in, because you believe in these kinds of things, because you're born right now, you have this education, and you're here in this room.
I think what Ludvig was asking was that even if you understand what being a Nazi is, but can you really understand it if you're coming from like an American libertarian perspective?
It's like, can you be part of many cultures and make it to the point where you understand all these cultures, and you could just...
You can know what it is, but can you really understand it?
I think that there are values and there is culture, and I think you can understand each other's values or disagree on a value level, but then somebody wants moussaka and you want mashed potatoes. That's different, right? But I think, and I was telling you before we started, I'm reading a book now with diaries from soldiers in SS and soldiers in the end of the Second World War. So here you have a guy who's 18 or 20 years old. They've grown up with Hitler. The only thing they've read in a newspaper ever or heard on radio is created by the Nazi party. So that's their worldview. They know that they're extremely dangerous Bolsheviks that are treating their people like shit and that are coming to take over more and more of Europe. And you, as a brave German soldier, you're the only hope for Europe, for your family, for your values. So you got to go there and you got to stop them. That's what you're going to do. And you go there and you live through hell and high water, and you fight, and your friends die, and you get hurt, and you do this. And then in the end of this war, you find out that, oh, your leaders also killed millions and millions of innocent people in concentration camp. And anybody who's SS, they're all of a sudden a criminal just by having an SS tattoo. And some knew this and some didn't know what happened. But could you imagine how your world changes? And back then it was, you're either Soviet Union or you're Nazi. Which one would you have chosen? Would you be with Stalin or Hitler? And we have very little information. And now you look back and say, like, fucking Nazis, shoot them all. They were evil people. I mean, they probably had their dreams and visions and whatever. And when you start looking at people like that and see an ISIS soldier and understand they have their own narrative, they have their own reason why, then it's so much more difficult to see them as Darth Vader or so. Even him, he's complex, right? But to see them like villains. And if you have a very simplistic narrative, it's bad guys and good guys, and you shoot the bad guys, right?
It's so hard to see how an ISIS soldier could educate me to become an ISIS soldier. I kind of still feel that it's more likely that he could be educated in a liberal way.
Exactly, and that's the fallacy of your culture. Or even worse, it would be like, he can believe what he wants, that's as good as what I want. We have different views on some certain things, but he is entitled to have that view. Freedom of speech, it's at the core of your culture, right? And then you allow somebody to have something who's super, super violent, counter society, a threat to us all and whatever. You know, whereas a dictator would say, that fucker, let's throw him away immediately, right? Mussolini, he shut down the Italian mob in 2 weeks. Since everybody knew who they was, he just sent people there, hung them, and said anybody else who's a mob, no. Mob activity just stopped in 2 weeks, right? But then you have a dictator with all the problems that has.
I think one thing that's really important here is like the freedom of speech thing, because on paper everyone has it, but in reality most people don't, because you know they have obligations and they don't want to take the risk of, maybe they have some opinion, and they actually really believe it and want to stand for it, but they don't dare to. Maybe because they need money, maybe because it will make them maybe lose their friends or make them less popular and whatever. And like you can really express yourself in really stupid ways very fast on social media.
Absolutely.
And that's good and bad. But the point is, freedom of speech is really, everyone has it on paper, but in practice most people don't, I think.
No, but I don't even think we have it in paper. I think that's a very good example to explain my point. So freedom, we define that as you could potentially say whatever the next sentence. You decide that yourself, right? You can voice any opinion, combine whichever words you want. But that's not the case, because anybody who had your education, your DNA, has been through everything you've been through in your life, would sit quiet and listen now. And then you would say exactly what you're going to say next. So it's not free. It's perceived as free. But you're like a computer. You have your hardware and you have your software. And if you are a poor kid in a ghetto and your mother's on crack and your father's dead, you will make other choices and have other views. They're not free, any of them, right? But if you grow up in Beverly Hills, you'll be probably screwed up for different reasons, but then you would have different views. None of those kids choose where they grew up, choose their experiences. So the notion of having a free will and the actually free will, I debate that. And that's an important question, because if you believe that criminals are bad guys that could have not robbed the bank, but they did it because they're evil, you should punish them. But if they do just the same thing as you would have, if you were in their shoes, you should try to help them make better decisions.
Right. There's a lot of commitment and consistency underlying that. And it's like a pattern that builds up over time, where it's very hard to break the pattern over a long period of time. Yeah. And what I guess a corollary to that is, should we structure society in terms of commitment ladders? Kind of like an army.
What type of commitment are you envisioning in your army?
That would depend. That would depend. It's like if you're going to build a society, and then obviously you have to build allegiance in some way, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to structure them in different tiers and cohorts and different stuff. And then, these people are more trustworthy because they've gone up all the ladder. Mm-hmm. Whereas to a person in the beginning, they can, you have to assign some certain trustworthiness ratio to the people in the different tiers.
I think democracy sort of... it becomes very complicated to make systems where there is A and B class citizens. At the same time, it becomes very complex when society calls for complex decisions. And of course, not everybody would read up or understand or be able to contribute. So, not everybody can drive a car because it's too dangerous, but everybody can vote regardless how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe in the future, we will have more sophisticated political systems where you need to have a certain level of commitment or effort to be able to have a view in certain questions, or that you can mandate people who will do that for you in a more granular way than just somebody you've never known on a note every 3 years and you put a paper in a box, or every 4 years. So I think I think there's something severely wrong with our political systems. I mean, who are your 6 favorite EU representatives?
I have no idea.
Exactly, right? But you're paying their salary and you don't really know what they're doing, but it's probably good because you're for an open Europe, right? Great. Yeah. But we have no clue what these guys are doing.
Yeah, and the point is, should they have a responsibility to send me home letters of what they've been doing the last week? And even if they did, would I even open those letters?
No, probably not, right?
I wouldn't care, would I? Maybe.
And then there's also, I think there's a fallacy because we've inherited wars, right? So my dad's generation grew up in wars, world wars. His dad grew up in world wars. Then you didn't dream about becoming Zlatan. You dreamt of becoming a hero on the battlefield. Second World War and photography killed that. But before, that's what kids wanted, right? Mm. And so when they came home and in the 50s and 60s, all the movies had an increasing number of people getting shot because these guys had been to war. They didn't think it was exciting if somebody slapped somebody. So all of a sudden we have all the violence on television. It's bizarre how much violence we have. But it's because these war heroes needed, something with a certain level of excitement. Yeah. And we inherited war between classes. It was a class war. You should hate your employer that sucks out your blood in order to exploit you and whatever, which is completely alien, right? I come up with a company. You have 2 societies. One society, there's a guy called Kamprad. He invents a company and he employs tens of thousands of people and he gets goods to a lot of other people and he pays taxes. So he can have 600 more hospitals and 6,000 more roads and whatever. And then you have another country where he doesn't exist. So there's a lot less in that. In this country, they think that he stole that money from the workers or somehow from the people that didn't start a company. In this country, they think he's the best thing since sliced bread. Fast forward 100 years, which society do you think is most prosperous? And this first one, they believe that there's a cake, and if you get a piece of the cake, I lose that. And I get that sometimes, which is very sort of strange. I can get that from various sort of views, that as if I've stolen my wealth or my success from somebody else.
But what do you say to them? Do you say anything?
Somehow was easy because I'm a man, because I'm white, because I'm middle-aged, because I'm whatever it might, because I'm in Sweden, that it was easy. Whereas almost everybody I know that I worked like psychos, really committed to something, being passionate and purposeful and just kept going at it as much as I have, they're successful.
I always come back to Robinson Crusoe when asked things like that. I wonder, who did he steal his wealth from that he built up on that island all alone?
I perfected myself in old tasks and was forced to learn new ones. In short, I learned to master everything in my island except myself.
The funny thing, and if you sort of kick the left in the butt a little bit, you have very angry leftish writers and journalists and provocateurs that knows how to write and can afford to have the computer because their company's paying tax. And on an average salary, it takes until 55 until you paid your own schools, your own hospital bills, your own part of the roads. So if you work for another 5-10 years, maybe you contribute a little bit. So when people say, my taxpayers' money, and then you have a Bill Gates and how much money, or Stefan Persson and how much money he pays in as a taxpayer. These guys are contributing more to society than anybody else.
Yeah, speaking of Kamprad and IKEA, there was a leftist with an official role in the Socialist Youth Party.
Yeah, I read that. That's what I was thinking about.
That his life's winnings should be distributed to the workers of IKEA.
Yeah. Instead of seeing that he gave them jobs and he gave the state money. And so it's a very twisted view on what drives the engine, right? It's like if somebody who's speaking in an electrical microphone is against electricity that powers their microphone, or that pays for their life support machine, or that pays for the light so that people can see them, or whatever. The arena requires people contributing. Right? And one way to contribute, a very, very good way to contribute, is to build companies. And I know a guy who's a billionaire, and I said, what do you do non-profit? What do you do to help people? He said, well, starting point, I pay 50% tax every year. So I pay hundreds of millions in tax. That's a good way to start contributing, right? Yeah. I'm good at making money, so I'll try to make more money and pay more tax. That's what he said. And it triggers, is that good or bad? Or so would I want more of him or less of him? Yeah, more of him. But the society need to make rules so that guys like that make nice companies with good business for society and not exploit the planet, environment, people, because then they should be either stopped or taxed or penalized or whatever. And that has been very bad before, because there's this curve where social good is on one side, and then personal or private greed is on the other.
Yeah, as if you can't have both.
Yeah, for a long time they sort of go along each other, but then where society good stops long time ago, greed will keep on coming out with new versions of the same medicine or the same whatever it might be.
I was thinking, kind of going back to what you were both saying about the leftist thing there. I think the real root cause of that problem is that those people have been born into this society, and then they just take it for granted. Kind of like what you were saying about the electrical microphone.
Yeah.
And like, I'm speaking into a microphone, but I know someone made this.
Absolutely.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
So,
and if somebody's parents are in a hospital somewhere, which my dad is, he's paralyzed, I'm very happy that there's a hospital there that somebody paid for, right?
Yeah.
And the communist writer didn't pay for that hospital.
Yeah.
He hasn't even contributed, or she.
And I mean, the big problem is that if you take a country like Sweden, where you have a lot of taxes and you have a lot of welfare recipients and so forth, and those people are receiving this, but they're not appreciating it to the full psychological weight.
Exactly.
And then you could say that they need to be educated to appreciate it, but I don't think, like, even if you were to structure such an educational thing, like informing them of the whole, like a comprehensivist thing, like, how are you going to teach them to appreciate being part of this?
No,
that's
but
like
I think that
experience.
it needs to do. First of all, it needs to be with personal development and seeing much more complexity at the same time. You understand that football is not about kicking the ball in the goal. It is, but it's also about having the right team. It is, but it's also having the right coach, the right football courts and schools, enough football on television, large arenas, national pride as football players, and all of a sudden, that complex ecosystem creates successful football teams, right? And the same thing goes for entrepreneurship. You need to start in school. You need to, I think, make entrepreneurs and company builders heroes, because it's fuel so much for others. But you also need to educate company builders so that they do not exploit the earth, so that they see a bigger perspective, so that they take more social responsibility. So for me, if people sit and buy and sell Bitcoin, that has absolutely no value. And if I was the dictator, that would be taxed 99%. Has no value for anybody, right? Whereas if you build really successful schools that are better than everybody else and happier kids, and you make a profit on that, well done. And I would tax that profit, but I would tax it much less. And I would let you make profits by focusing the smartest brain on the schools, on hospitals, and on other things, right? Whereas the discussion is, there can't be profits in the welfare system, thinking that somebody would take, half the food away from a senior citizen. That should be criminal. And that should be part of the rules guiding whether it's a private or it's a public player. But I've never seen in the world that public companies over time are better than private companies. I was in Soviet Union way back when. Didn't really work out. I've been to Cuba. Didn't really work out. Venezuela right now. It doesn't work, right? Because if you take away passion, if you take away the people that work for free all night and all day and really, really drive a vision forward out of the equation, then you don't get entrepreneurship and you don't get change.
Yeah, and I think if you think about that, it's one thing to say that, hey, we're gonna teach and build entrepreneurs, but I think it's how do you get someone to become an entrepreneur? I don't think you can teach that. I think you have to just draw it out somehow.
I disagree completely, and I think maybe we define entrepreneurship a little bit. So for me, entrepreneurship is the ability to see a vision, dream about it, and then start walking towards that vision, right? So it's not about having an idea necessarily. It's helping somebody with an idea. It's being an intrapreneur in a large company with a passion to change. It is a politician that, against all odds, just changes things, right? So with that definition, Fidel Castro could be seen as an entrepreneur, good or bad, right? Probably pretty bad, and you can see a lot of different people that are change makers. So if you exchange it for change maker, those are the kinds of things that I would like to to educate, to champion, to applaud. Oh, anybody that pays more than 100 million in tax, you drive in the bus lane. Thank you so for your contribution. Whereas that would be inconceivable, right? But a diplomat could go before the line at the airport. Why? Oh, because they help society. Well, the other guy that just paid 100 million helps society as well.
Right. So you have a much more broader and also better defined definition of what it means to be an entrepreneur than I do. And I want to ask you about, because you've thought about this and you come up with different sorts of entrepreneurial types, like archetypes almost. And I really want to ask you about this. But before I do, I would like if you could explain maybe about Jan Stenbeck, because I don't think a lot of people really know so much about him or the role that he played.
For me, he's one of the most successful Swedish entrepreneurs. And he came from a background of wealth. His father was a lawyer that worked very closely with the Kruger companies, and they also had Kinnevik and so forth. But he created, what is today Vodafone, TV3, Metro, company after company, Tele2 within the Kinnevik group, MTG. And just going after industry after industry where he felt that it was too regulated, it wasn't smart enough, and he was very inspired by American businessmanship. And just being able to, without any limits to his vision, create new companies. Not so many people have done that. And I call that type a serial entrepreneur. I mean, the only thing they're going to start another company. It's kind of like you start out like Donald Duck. There's a new episode in every new adventure in every episode.
Right.
But they never speak about the last episode or the last adventure. And you go towards some sort of, the ideal is if you're an Elon Musk or if you're a Richard Branson, where they keep on creating significant companies in industry after industry.
He was truly thinking outside the box because he didn't even consider the legal system. Well, he considered it, but he just disregarded it.
Yeah.
Because all of these things were state monopolies that
Absolutely.
he just challenged it.
He was sitting in balloons sending radio because it was in free airspace and things like that. And I think it's with a serial entrepreneur, what is very common is that they don't have any impact at all. So at Epicenter and Result, we work with scale-ups, not startups typically. And a scale-up is a successful company growing really fast. A startup is an idea looking for product market fit. It's a temporary organization. Nobody wants to be a startup.
Could you please explain that difference more clearly?
Yeah.
Because I think it's like some people might not get it.
So think of a startup as a couple of guys in a basement with an idea. It's unproven, it's not making money. Maybe you got funding, maybe you didn't. And only 4% of those startups make 500,000 euros in sales after 3 years. 0.4% do 10 million euros. So it's easier to become a rap star in Sweden than to create a scale-up company. Now, we work with scale-ups. We work with companies that are that 0.4% and grow really rapidly. They're the ones that pay in tax, hire people, and so forth. But the most of the romance and the most of the media is about start up this, she's going to change this, he's going to change this. No impact at all. And I'm not saying that that's something bad, but it's like if you would focus 90% of the football journalism on the Little League or on Korpen and 10% on Champions League.
Right, but everyone just hears about the Silicon Valley thing.
Yeah, but Silicon Valley, they have millions of startups that are not successful as well, right? Yeah. And then they have some that are very big, and they're not startups, they're scale-ups. So the lingo is wrong. And then you make a startup incubator in Norrland and you think that's going to change the world. We're going to be Silicon Valley, but in Norrland. And it's never going to happen because they don't have the ecosystem around it. And there's an invisible playbook that is just not available there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's available in very few places in the world, Stockholm actually being one of them. And if you realize that, and if you realize as a politician you want to drive change, new jobs, more tax money, you should focus on helping scale-ups and not startups. You should be very, very nice to startups too, because they are a precondition to getting scale-ups. So I salute anybody that tries. But there's a difference between trying and succeeding.
A related issue to identifying or maybe training entrepreneurs is that when I went to school, I went to high school in the late 80s, nobody was thinking in terms of starting companies. The only thing you talked about was which company or which industry will you work in.
Yeah. But I imagine some of you had sports dreams, right?
Yes.
So that's what I'm talking about. And what I think that we need to do as a society, and maybe this should be at the beginning of the interview, but I believe that we have inherited a lot of conflicts. Men against women, workers against employers, isms, left against right. There's a lot of inherited wars when we look at our society right now. And I don't think that's the way to go forward. And the way we need to go forward, we need to find a new narrative. And that narrative needs to be inclusive. So you can be an individualist, but in a communal context. There need to be a common purpose. So almost all societies that have had great impact, they've had a strong common purpose. Could have been negative, like the Soviet Union or the Nazis or others, but they've had a strong common purpose. Or the Social Democrats during, Branting and onward. It's a strong common purpose that people feel that they can be part of. And there needs to be an individual development of consciousness and complexity and ability to deal with complexity on an individual level. And that needs to be started in school.
Do you think we're headed in the right direction? Do you think Sweden or the world is going in that way?
I think Sweden is a blueprint for where the world will go in the future. However, I believe that because I am Swedish, this is part of my culture, I have this schooling and whatever. But I think there are things that are inherently good for human beings, right? And I think there are things that are bad for human beings. And I think that a lot of the world religions, for instance, have strong components of limiting what is good for human beings. Putting guilt on women's sexuality, for instance, or forcing people to live together for the rest of their lives, whether that is good for them or for their children or not, or having guilt trips where you're going to go to hell and you're going to do all kinds of other things. I think that is extremely bad for society. And also respect for religion, which is often so they respect all religions. People don't really respect, they accept, which are two completely different things. And is it okay to have a judge that believes that you will go to hell and be burning in 1,000 years in hell because you did a crime and they're going to sentence you? I mean, is it okay or is it not okay? Is it okay to have a teacher that believes that Santa Claus exists and teaches that to kids? Okay or not okay?
Both are bad, but I think I would prefer the teacher if I had to choose one. A judge is probably one of the most important cornerstones of a society. Yeah, but now you're going to different levels, right?
Okay. So, but I mean, it would be very strange to say that somebody who is religious can't be a teacher. But at the same time, to teach kids religion as if it's true, I'm extremely against that in whatever shape and form it is.
Yeah, I think you should maybe. Since all humans seem to have some kind of a need for a super primate in their lives, some kind of a super gorilla, and that becomes God and these kinds of monotheistic religions. But to replace that, maybe we should foster a discussion on spirituality, a general spirituality, just something that fulfills your own psychological and mental needs for peace and inner quiet and self.
That's what I refer to when I speak about self-development. And unfortunately, a lot of words have been hijacked. So spirituality is like, feel the crystals, man. And they completely don't care about science, or vaccine is bad. There's like all these big pharma companies wanting to kill us, man. So, okay. And then they lose all credibility. Yeah. Or you have the Burning Man movement, which is super powerful and interesting. But half of everybody's on LSD, which means it's a pretty bad speaking partner to governments or to large corporates and so forth. So it is. I see that in the society that I want us to build. So coming back to what I said, we need to find a new narrative and a new purpose. We need to have ways of developing as individuals throughout life, supported by a society who doesn't say, well, all values are equally good. No, that's not as good as this. There is, as you said, there's different levels of, like there's levels in education or levels in work. There is levels in personal development. Keegan is extremely interesting. Robert Keegan, a Harvard professor, that is like the Maslow of our times.
Really? I don't even know about this guy.
He's phenomenally interesting. And basically what he says is that we start our lives with just being impulse driven. And then you sort of want food. Wow, then it's warm. And a couple of % of all of us stay in that stage. And they're usually violent criminals, they're in jails, and they're in other places. Then you become a little bit older, you realize there are other people, you're 3, but it's me first. You just take. We all know people that are like that as well. And then you become 15, 16, and it's like, wow, it's all about the others. Am I in the right guy? Oh, is this embarrassing? And your whole life is defined by looking at others, right? And then you go you become 30, 40, and then it's like bara vara, mindfulness, the inner journey, and you want to be on a beach in Ibiza and meditate. And then you realize that's an ego trip as well, and you just think about yourself all the time. So you become 60 and become Bill Gates and want to cure malaria and give back to society. That's unfortunately how we develop, and very few reach above the 3rd level. I think it's 60% of all the business leaders in the US are level 3. They think only and define themselves only in relationship to what other people think about them, the system, the salary, the position, and everything else. And if society is built that way, you get guys like the Wolf on Wall Street. And another thing they say is that you cannot understand the higher levels reasoning. So if you tell the Wolf of Wall Street, what do you think about environment? Shouldn't we really try this? Oh, you sly bastard. Do you have any insights on that environment gig? That's so cool. How much money are you going to make? They cannot understand. So that's why you cannot discuss with ISIS that the Jews are actually super cool and contribute a lot and had a lot of Nobel Prizes. It doesn't compute, right? They need to develop as individuals. And when they do, they realize that sexism is pretty uncool, and it's probably not so smart to believe that what they believe religiously. And then it's like a meta cure against a lot of bullshit because you develop as an individual.
What's this called if someone wants to Google for it?
Robert Keegan.
Robert Keegan.
Yeah.
Right.
And depending on which stage you're in, you have completely different ways of looking at the world. If you're number 4, you want to reduce complexity. You're a leader that wants to sort of solve problems and reduce complexity. If you're level 5, Bill Gates, you want to find complexity. How can we have much more difficult tasks to solve, like malaria, right? And it's very, very interesting to see. And they're different. I mean, already the sort of the philosophers in 18th century Germany, they also saw this lifelong development. And I think it holds true for societies as well. Afghanistan is not a society developed enough to have some of these conversations, right? Sweden is. The US is somewhere in between, right? And I think that it's extremely important that if you can understand and agree that you need to develop your own way of understanding the world and embrace more complexity, then all of a sudden, if that is super important to have a good society, to have happy people, depression is going up like crazy, sick leave, according to depression, up 70% and so forth. All of these things are functions of us not having the tools and the self-leadership to manage a more complex society.
Right. I think if you... Was it stage level 3 where it's like you're a teenager and you're just looking to other people and trying to imitate? I think if you think about that in terms of a feedback loop perspective, I feel like social media and the internet, especially since people grow up with it, that's, if you look at that as like a feedback loop, that feedback loop is just being reinforced stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
And people are going to stay in that level 3 teenage years much longer.
Absolutely.
And the longer they stay in it, the harder it becomes to build a discipline and think for themselves.
It's super real. For them, I mean, if
it's like a hyper-reality that you're like a bubble.
If you want to see sort of where you are yourself, think about how much you compare yourself to other people. If you compare yourself a lot to other people, or if you base your own view on things and on yourself based on other people's views, if that is a very strong component, that is typical level 3. And often there's also we and them, fucking immigrants, I don't like the Jews, blah, 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 blah. And you can cluster them as something completely different than you, right? Mm. And then you see that they're, of course, individuals as well. It becomes more complex. And then you see at the top, probably if we ever get there, it's all one, right? It's a system that is interlinked. And if you have really poor conditions for kids in suburbs, they're going to rob you regardless of where you live at some point in time, because opportunity is not shared. So it becomes your job to share opportunity so you don't get robbed. These things are stitched together.
But at the same time, like, you are a super competitive guy. You've been doing all kinds of business stuff, crazy a lot, and also become champion in martial arts and things like that. Like, it's like all across, very competitive. It's no doubt about it. Yeah. So obviously, you want to compare yourself to the right people who are really cool that you are inspired by? Maybe some historic role model, or maybe some other really good business person or martial artist, whatever. But like that inspires you to want to beat that guy, right?
No, but it's different. I don't decide my self-worth based on if I win or lose against that person. When I was 18, I definitely defined myself through other people and how good I was, and I wanted to win against other people. Now I see the other people I fight with as I'm very thankful to them because they keep me in shape, they keep me excited and things. And it's part of a game that we created together. It has absolutely no correlation with what I think about myself.
It's almost like a jam session.
It's a jam session. It's like, and with business, we don't have any competitors in any of the business I do. I don't see anybody being a competitor of mine, right? And if somebody takes business that we would want to have, it inspires me to be better at the business we do. Very seldom happens. If it happened all the time, maybe I would see it differently. Or if I didn't have food on the table, maybe I would see it differently. But where I am right now, I don't really see it that way. And it's also, but it is also funny, there's a male-female dimension on this. When I spoke to my wife about Keegan, she said, that's a very male perspective. Women usually get that a lot earlier, that you need to contribute in society, that, you know, there's a stronger understanding for caring about nature and caring about things. And at the same time, there's a stronger tendency to compare against others in social media and in other things as well. So there's a difference, I think, with male and female with regards to how Keegan operates. And I think that there are more Donald Trumps among male, which is a strong sort of defining themselves based on everybody else and so forth. Yeah. But there's a strong element of comparing how good is my life against the neighbors that I see more in many women than I see in men.
Do you have high expectations for big societal changes? I mean, given all we've discussed, it seems like human nature will be quite a difficult impediment to positive change.
Yeah, I think if I would be the benevolent dictator of the world, I would gather the largest economical powers and I would say, let's make it a lot clearer what rules of engagement and what we demand from people that wants to do business with us, travel to our countries, and do a bunch of other things. Kind of like what was done with Soviet Union, right? And that made Soviet Union crumble. And then you would have regimes that are toppled and new politicians that get empowered, because if that person gets in charge in Venezuela, all of a sudden money pours into Venezuela, opportunity pours into Venezuela, right? Instead of having somebody that is, you know, offending human rights and killing people left and right based on old communist dogma. So that would be one step I would take. And I would completely reform school and base it on learning, not on getting jobs. If you look at old Athens had wonderful schools where people learn a lot of unnecessary things, like math and philosophy and everything else, and you studied for a very long time. And based on those thought schools, the most advanced society was created. And I think that we study far too little and we care too little about knowledge. And we also close the doors to those institutions. So if you have fire in the belly and you're prepared to try things and do things, that is not championed by anyone.
But do you have any hopes that this will actually come to fruition?
I mean, what we're trying to do, we're trying to start an institution, an academy, where you come in based on fire in the belly, and where half of the people coming in will be newly arrived or people from places that usually don't get this kind of chance. Half of them would be from other places, and where you create a company and you come in based on your idea. And one thing you do is build the company. So we help you build that company, and we're going to put money, the best network, the best teachers, everything at your service. We're also going to teach you how to build a company. So that's the academic part. And then you can pick what we call business skills, marketing, sales, or other business skills. And then we teach you super skills, which are things like understanding complexity or integrity or conflict resolution or self-esteem or completely different things. And we believe that these entrepreneurs with fire in the belly from Somalia or from Uzbekistan or whatever will create wonderful companies if they have the right kind of guts, the right kind of stamina. And I see that much more often in foreigners than in Swedes, because a lot of them, it took a while to come here, and it was pretty tough to come here. And when you face that kind of adversity, it makes your bones stronger and probably better as an entrepreneur. So I think that we have like this wonderful, wonderful unused asset in our foreign community that now does dry cleaning services or kebab stands that could build the Spotifys of tomorrow.
Do you believe that nation states are here for the long run?
I hate nation states.
Yeah, but do you think they will actually crumble, disappear within a century?
Yeah, they will in sort of in every meaningful perspective. So right now, because we have Sweden and we pay tax in Sweden, we have a joint agenda for Sweden. If our tax would go to the EU instead, for instance, heaven forbid, we wouldn't care so much about Sweden, right?
Yeah.
But all these nations were created to defend property that you need to create wealth, and to get people to kill people that didn't come from that place. They came from somewhere else. So you needed to unite and call yourself Svear in order to defend yourself from people that wanted to take your shit. And when that is not the case anymore, nations just create more problems.
Yeah, we discussed culture earlier and how difficult it is to step outside your own cultural little box. And when I was first confronted with the idea of there not being nation states, I could hardly understand the question or the topic, because how could there not be countries?
Yeah.
And now for me, it's like, why are there countries?
Yeah. But I think that, for instance, let's have this as an example. Let's say you made a city where if anybody committed a crime that had a prison sentence, they could never again come into that city. And their apartment and cars and everything else was taken by the community. So it's a zero tolerance crime city. Let's say that happened. Then there's another city where you cannot be religious at all. You cannot have any kind of religious belief outside the one you have in your own head. You cannot speak about it. There are no churches. There's nothing else. Okay. Would that, with the strike of a wand, take away crime from one city and take away religious strife and terrorism and blah, 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 blah from the other country? And if so, would it be fair or unfair not to have the criminals or different radical religions in a city? Would it or wouldn't it be? So I think that as long as there are so many different values on what is right and wrong, there will be nation states protecting a model from others that does not want to live or subscribe to that model.
And talking of big societal changes, are you familiar with the fourth turning hypothesis?
No.
It's a theory about different archetypes and different eras of society, and these are recurring about every 80th or 90th, every 80 or 90 years. And according to that theory, around about now, or within like 10 or 15 years, we're due for something really big. We're talking big in terms of the depression in the 30s, or a world war, maybe a digital one, and changes in the relationship between the sexes in terms of how democracy, everything, really.
Yeah. And I think that what you're doing there, and what many people that have prophecies or conspiracy theories or other things are doing, I'm not saying that you're a conspiracy theorist, but is you put on a lens and you say, everything in the world is about, or you take on that lens, and it's very easy. It's kind of if you take on the lens astrology. Are you an Aries? And then that really makes sense, right? I don't think the world operates like that. I don't think it is cyclical in our society. Society doesn't care about us as individuals. Society is an organism. Technology develops whether it's good or bad for us. We could conceivably, come up with something that just kills all of us, right? Technology couldn't care less. And I think that the speed of change right now and the powers in motion are going to change the world so dramatically and so many times that 80 years is an unfathomably long time. So it'll change in 10 years and in 10 years again, and it will change continuously at an exponential pace. And that's one of the few things that I feel really, really sure of. I don't know how it's going to be, but I think that conceivably There wouldn't be any nation states 50 years from now. There wouldn't be any disease 50 years from now. We would live to 150, 200 years 50 years from now. There could be such dramatic changes. We will plateau and have less and less humans on planet Earth from about 2030, and peak out at 11 billion or whatever it is. No, not 20, I think it's 2050, and then it will go down again.
So how are you preparing for this? Or maybe not just preparing, but like what are some general guidelines that you have in order to stay adaptive in the future and do the best that you can?
Yeah, I think that I'm, first of all, I built a world around me with very many degrees of freedom. I can live where I want to do. I can buy whatever I want to buy.
And you know a lot of people from many different areas.
And I know a lot of people from many different places. And I'm not interested in materialistic things at all. But I think that the freedom that can be created by creating your own professional platform and being an entrepreneur, even though you have very tough nights where you can't sleep and everybody's been through hell and high water who's been a successful entrepreneur. But I think for me, that is one way of preparing. So a little bit, regardless of what goes on, if you're entrepreneurial and curious and you have a platform where you don't have to put money on the table tomorrow morning, then change is really good for you. And also I'm turning 48 now, so I don't really have to be in the driver's seat of all these crazy things that are going to happen. I'll be happy to sit, on front row and look and applaud the ones that are going to make all these fantastic changes happen.
Yeah, as long as you're secure in having food and shelter.
Yeah, no, but I think that there's a generation, when they die, the world will become so much better immediately. Hillary Clinton would have won super big if the youth could have voted right. The Duarches and the Putins and the Trumps, they're going to die pretty soon. And I don't think we'll have a new generation of people like that. They're brought up during war. They're brought up during strife. They're very much Keegan 3. So I think that something else will change. What happens when all the kids that have had fathers on paternity leave, being with them there all the time, when they become 50 and get kids? What happened when? So we're going to see a lot of positive change, I think, ahead.
But you are building your security in the future on your network and your own capabilities and your ability to stay moving like a shark. But there is a movement in Sweden now among investors, like small-time investors, that they're trying to save their way into retirement, an early retirement on a very small nest egg by living very frugal and spending very little, but living off of a small financial nest egg. That sounds dangerous to me in a society in big changes.
Yeah, nobody knows how the pension system will look if you live unto 150 or 200, right? And from my perspective, I don't want to be agile like a shark in this swim. So I've tucked away enough so that I don't have to worry about worrying. But and I am more interested in putting my skill sets together to drive societal change. So that's something that I'm focusing more and more on. The university that we're starting, or the academy, is one of those examples. But also not feeling like a Swede or an American or a Spaniard, even though if I live in these three countries, I could live in very many different places, because I don't feel that I, for nationalistic reasons, need to be in one place.
Okay, let me rephrase. I'm trying to contrast having money versus having a network and a skill set.
Yeah, it's not a fair comparison if you have both, right? What you can use a network for is to get money and to get skill sets and to get all kinds of other things. But also, if you're in a village with people that will take care of you when you're old, that's also a network. But I think that's not where society is going. And I think it.
Yeah, but if you only save money and then retire, which probably means you typically lose both your skill set and your network.
Yeah. But I mean, then you need to have enough money to sustain that. And I think that also somebody invented that you become a senior citizen at 65, and then you're going to get some money from the state. That's citizen salary, right? Everybody's against that, but not after 65. What if you had that at 30 instead, and then you let the machines do things and you tax the machines, right? There could be completely different societal models seeing the light of day. But it's not about having the money to sustain the day. It's about living a meaningful and fruitful life. And what does that entail? So for me, I don't feel I'm going to work now. I don't have that perspective really on work.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and I think you are definitely safe. What I'm trying to do is contrast your situation with people just hoping for retirement and not doing anything. But
and I think that's this, but it's also interesting. I think that I've worked probably twice as much as the normal 9-to-5 worker until 48, right? So if I've done that from 20, then I've had 28 years, which equals 56 years plus 20. So that's 76 years of working really, really hard, or working, like a normal worker. And the same is true for a lot of people, and I come back to that are successful in their business or in their sport. They train or work harder than others. So I had three of the strongest female leaders in large Swedish companies. I had them on stage, and I asked them, so what fuels your success? And one of them said, well, I don't play badminton all weekends. I like building businesses. I become better at that. I study, I work, The other, this was Annie Vigelius from SVT. She said, I don't know anybody that has worked as much as I do. I think that's probably one of the reasons. And it comes back. And it is not what people want to hear. They want to hear it's easy to become an entrepreneur, or that person, that pop band really had an easy time. There's like their sixth pop band. All the others, failed, and they've been laughed at, and they've been alone and no audience came, and they've been doing that for 20 years, and then they hit it big. And then it looks easy for other people.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Ola.
No, my pleasure. I hope somebody can make sense of the conversation.
Definitely. All right, we sure did cover a lot of bases there. I hope you enjoyed listening to this discussion with Ola Ahlvarsson, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. You can either find it as a link in the description of this episode, or by going to www.futureskillspodcast.com and just typing in your name in the newsletter box. And then you'll get all of our future summaries of episodes, and you'll also get access to our monthly Q&As. Okay, thanks for listening, and have a nice day.